Yeah, over there.
Do you think the increased knowledge of design in the general public increases the probability of something like that, of something like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, these larger corporations embracing this idea of maybe designing them in their stores?
Yeah, the question is, does greater design awareness increase the possibility that a Home Depot or a Lowe's could get very design conscious themselves? And I think Home Depot and Lowe's are actually sort of design conscious as they are now. I don't think they don't do it the way I would love to see it done, but they're trying at least. I think certainly what happens, I'm just gonna let that pattern go, it's nice. Certainly what happens is that I think, someone can go to Lowe's and say, why don't you do for hardware what Starbucks did for coffee? Could and they would get that idea because Starbucks exists, But, the guy that came up with the idea for Starbucks, he had a different analogy. He said, it'd be nice if I could do a coffee shop in America like the ones I loved in Italy. What's funny is that if you go to Italy, you can't find anything that the only thing that's like Starbucks in Italy is Starbucks, And so, everyone sort of starts with an inspiration, goes someplace else. But certainly now, again, compared with, say, 1980, when I first graduated from design school myself, people are much more design conscious now. You go to a shopping mall and, there's, it's not just the Apple store. Banana Republic is well designed, or Urban Outfitters is well designed. There are different kinds of design, but they're very thoughtfully designed, And when I was hanging around Parmatown Mall in the 70s, it was just like one dopey, ugly thing after another. And I was still another dopey, ugly thing walking around in there. So I fit right in. Yeah. Have I ever been asked to do more than I can handle? Yeah, I have actually. Luckily, in some cases, I have partners who bail me out. I can sort of if it's too much work for me, or if it's something I don't know how to do, sometimes I'll just say I don't know how. I'll eventually realize I don't know how to do that. Sometimes I've been asked to do things that I disagree with, and I'll just sort of say no. I'm fortunate in that I have enough of a business going on in my office that we don't have to take every single job that comes along. And part of, I think, part of being an artist or a designer is sort of remembering that you actually have a say in things. That doesn't mean you have to be a prima donna and expect everyone to be worshiping you all the time, but it does mean that anytime you're doing something, there really is a partnership. I mean, even though someone's paying you the money, you can always say, keep the money, I'm out of here, Yeah, but you have to be willing to walk away from that money if they're paying you something, but you can always walk away from it. And so I've done that, I don't like doing it because I'm too polite. I don't like conflict, but sometimes I have done that. And then when I've gotten more than I can handle, a few times I've had projects where I just kind of said to one of my partners, you have to help me with this. I'm lost and I don't know what to do. And they'll sit me, and they feel sorry for me. Generally, if you ask for help, people will be helpful. They're flattered if you ask them for help. Sometimes I ask the client for help. I'll be working with, I'll go in and I'll say to a client, I've been trying to figure this one out and I just can't get it. Here's everything I've done. Why don't you look at this and tell me if you see anything here that could help? And some of my favorite clients are people that will look at that and say, hey, let's see what it is. And then they'll actually come up with some suggestions that are useful. So it's like, even though the one good thing about being a designer instead of, say, a fine artist, nothing wrong with being a fine artist, but fine artists generally have to work on their own. They're the individual authors of what they're doing. Designers almost always work on some kind of team. With other people, and your ability to kind of draw strength and inspiration from those team members is one big factor in how successful you get to be, and one thing that makes it really fun. You have to enjoy that part of it. Any other questions? Right there on the aisle.
I believe you said that Saks took 18 months. What is the normal process that you go through on a job, and how long do they usually take?
So for Saks, for instance, the first thing we do is I remember with that one, it was really interesting. Outside of my client saying I sort of like squares, he said, here's like the whole history of all our logos, but we're open to having an entirely new logo. And he showed me all this research. They wanted it to feel like sort of female, but also a little male. They wanted it to respect their heritage, but look forward to their future. All this research you sort of had to absorb in terms of what people thought of them, what they wanted people to think of them. And then we had to figure out how they made all those bags and boxes, we don't want to propose anything that they didn't know how, that they wouldn't be able to make or they couldn't afford to make. And then we sort of went around the stores and looked at those things, talked to different people. Then you finally sit down and start doing some work. And the work that you end up doing, you know, sometimes that's the really fun part. You just kind of like say, okay, let's set the word Saks Fifth Avenue in 100 different typefaces and see what it looks like, right? Let's do all this research and blow up some of these old things. We had photographs, we had drawings, we had all these different color studies we had done. And then finally sort of we sifted our way through and started coming into that one solution after a few false starts actually. And then it so happened that in the midst of all this, the president of Saks changed from one person to another person. And so then we had to pretend to start all over for person number 2. Not pretend, we actually literally had to go on hold and then go back in and say, here's what we did. And person number 2 is sort of like, what is all this stuff? What did that guy before me tell you to do? And so the new guy had to get accommodated too, so that took a few extra months. But then finally, you know, then it goes into a phase where we're actually making the bags and boxes and stuff, doing the artwork for those things. Very complicated, all these different measurements. They keep changing the measurements. Can we make it a little taller, make it a little wider? That costs too much. What if we make it a little shorter? Okay, that's fine. And so we had to go back and forth with that. Then finally, they start actually physically making these things on printing presses. We go look at them, make sure they're coming out good. And then one day you see someone on the street hold one of the bags, and it's 18 months later. But you get there somehow. So then that process, one way or another, even if you do a book cover really simply, there's a part where you're reading the book and thinking about it, but there's a part where you're sketching ideas. There's a part where you kind of have the ones that you like, and the part where you show those to the people who ask you to do the work. Then the part where hopefully you have one that's the winner, and you kind of finish that one up, and then go in a bookstore, and there it is. That's fast compared to what they with a big shopping bag project, let's say. And some of the other projects are even bigger still, you know. So the process is always about the same, but the timeline can vary. Yeah.